Namaskar and thanks for tuning in to the Economic Brief, our weekly program on news related to geoeconomics with an Indian perspective. On the program, India's retail inflation in September is at a 99-month low. We'll analyze the implications of that with an expert. The economics Nobel laureates didn't just state the obvious that innovation leads to growth. They built growth models that guide the path to that goal. Google sees India as a global AI powerhouse, unveiling a $15 billion investment in Andhra Pradesh. And Brazil is at a climate crossroad. The COP30 host, it's expanding oil drilling, but it's still promising a green future. Before we move on, let's get some food for thought. India's Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal recently telling Indian industry about the importance of integration with the global supply chain, implying that diversification and self-reliance can be combined. Now, protections, they may be necessary is what he says, but only to a certain extent. Industry must have the confidence and the competence to compete.
We certainly don't want to be left at the mercy of one geography or even one or two geographies on any item in our supply chains, which can cripple our entire sector. We will need diversified sources. There may be items where we need solid protection, and we need to have that domestic value chain in sufficient quantity to make sure our entire sector does not become vulnerable. But that can be few items. By and large, we will have to integrate with global economies, particularly if you want to become an advanced economy yourself.
Well, so let's move to our top story and state the position as it is. It's coming up behind me. Inflation at a 99-month low. The retail inflation is at 1.54% in September of 2025. This is the lowest in over 8 years. Let's look at the reasons for this. So the reasons, it's contracted that food and beverages have contracted by 1.4%. That's an 81-month low, as you can see. Prices of vegetables, pulses, cereals have dropped. But this might provide people with, because it's giving them a lot more to buy in terms of the prices easing for household budgets. But what kind of impact could it have on rural livelihoods? We need to understand, because in the medium to long term, if prices continue to remain low, then that could affect the livelihoods and the incomes of agriculturists. So we're looking at core inflation now, and this is excluding food and fuel, 4.5% surge, because precious metals, have taken that. Prices of gold and silver, as we know, have gone up considerably, but without these metals, the core inflation is at 3.0, which is quite moderate. But we do know that there's a severe shortage of precious metals, especially silver, and that is driving these prices up. If we look at miscellaneous items, now miscellaneous items are almost everything under the sun, because we can say housing, clothing, health, education, transport, communications. Large number of services are included in this. 5.35% is driven largely by luxury goods and services. This is a crucial indicator, because this actually is covering a vast section of the economy. So the monetary policy analysts will be looking at this, in case they want to meddle with the interest rates. So this is a key factor. And perhaps, it has gone up from 5.04. So this is really something that perhaps the RBI will look at closely. We'll move on to our next slide, which is talking about the target inflation, which was, in fact, the headline inflation, which is at 1.4%, which is actually below the tolerance band of 2%. So the policymakers actually do have room to stimulate growth, but will they do that because the miscellaneous items are quite high? We have to see. But, this is at least an indication that the policymakers can stimulate growth because it is below the headline inflation. What does it actually signal? What does all this signal? What does it imply, this inflation, these inflation numbers for our economy? We'll bring on the next slide, and this should be our concluding slide, which is, it does indicate that we are talking about an effective monetary policies. Things are working as far as the RBI and the Monetary Policy Committee is concerned. The GST rationalization is good, and we can see that there have been some supply side improvements, and hence the demand supply equation is pretty much in place. Before we introduce you to our guests on the program, let's get a little more food for thought, because this is from India's External Affairs Minister. He's talking about how India approaches different challenges in a global environment, and he's giving us a deeper meaning of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. Take a listen.
The global challenges we face, from pandemics to terrorism and economic instability to climate change, these challenges are interconnected and they transcend national borders. Our responses, therefore, must be more cooperation, transcending the competitive aspects of international politics. We see the world as one family, a vision enshrined in the timeless phrase of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is not just cultural wisdom, but an outlook that anchors our worldview. It is why India has consistently advocated for justice, dignity, opportunity, and prosperity for all societies and peoples.
Well, we are joined on the program by Prasenjit K. Basu, economist and author. He's joining us from New York. And Anil Padmanabhan, journalist and columnist, is joining us from New Delhi. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Prasenjit Basu, does core inflation, remaining elevated despite overall price stability, cause some concern?
Short answer is no.
Okay.
It is headline inflation that the RBI targets, and headline inflation is already far below the target of 2%. It is probably better that core inflation should be a little bit elevated, because otherwise headline inflation would be close to zero. And in fact, we haven't yet seen the full impact of the GST cuts. The effective average weighted GST rate has been reduced by 2 percentage points on 22nd of September. I think we'll begin to see the full impact of that in the October CPI numbers and beyond. And in fact, I would expect that headline inflation will be below 1% by October, which basically will leave a lot of room for further monetary policy easing. India does not need inflation to be near zero. The target is 2%. And I think the RBI could easily have cut even this month, but it chose not to in order to shore up the rupee a little bit. But, if it was looking purely at inflation targeting, then frankly, they should have cut. They should continue to cut at each MPC meeting going forward.
Okay, Mr. Padmanabhan, would prolonged food deflation impact agricultural incomes and rural livelihoods?
In a way, you're right. But the point to keep in mind is that food prices have been elevated for a long time. It's not that they were at a base level and from there they are falling or decelerating, actually. So, yes, if you take it in relative terms, yes, but not necessarily. So, because the minimum support price, etc., have been raised, so there is a floor for the farmer. So, it's actually good news from the consumer's point of view.
Okay.
If it endures and the deceleration becomes a decline, then we can talk about it impacting the rural livelihoods.
Gentlemen, do stay with us for our next story as well. We are talking about the Nobel Prize in economics, and we'll play out the story. Innovation, in fact, if we can go back a little bit, the Nobel Prize for Economics 2025, it was awarded to Joel Mokyr, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt for their pioneering work in innovation-led growth. From Mokyr's cultural lens to this is a lens on invention, to Aghion and Howitt's dynamic growth theories, this year's laureates offer a roadmap for economies seeking resilience and renewal in an age of disruption. The 2025 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences honored Joel Mokyr, Philippe Aghion, and Peter Howitt for their groundbreaking research on innovation-led growth. Their distinct yet complementary work reveals how technological progress and competitive dynamics drive long-term economic prosperity. Joel Mokyr studies how history and culture shape innovation, highlighting the role of knowledge institutions and idea exchange. He argues that growth needs an open, educated, and experimental environment to thrive.
For economics to work without economic history is like an evolutionary biologist without paleontology. And if you don't have paleontology, you just miss 99.5% of all the species that ever walked this earth. And so I teach economic history in some sense keeping that in mind, that we can observe in the past economic systems, economic societies, economic interactions that we don't have anymore.
Philippe Aghion and Peter Howitt connect growth to creative destruction, where new innovations replace old ones through the Schumpeterian model.
We built a new paradigm which we could compare with data that we could develop, which has now become the dominant paradigm in growth economics. And what is the idea behind the paradigm? The first idea is that long-term growth comes from cumulative innovation, where each innovator builds on the foundation of previous innovations. We always stand on the shoulders of giants who preceded us. We always stand on the shoulders of giants. So that's the first idea. Innovation is cumulative. The second idea is that innovation doesn't fall from the sky. It results from investments by entrepreneurs who pursue innovative investments, particularly in research and development, because they hope that by innovating, they will generate monopoly profits, innovation revenue.
Their model shows how competition among firms sparks innovation and how policies like R&D support and education reform sustain growth. Economic dynamism, defined as the constant renewal of ideas and firms, is key to lasting prosperity.
It's particularly important to recognize that producing the technological advances that result in economic growth requires cooperation between university research, business research, and development.
Together, their work forms a full theory of innovation-driven growth. Mokyr explains how societies become fertile ground for ideas, while Aghion and Howitt show how innovation fuels lasting prosperity through competition. Their insights guide policy on fostering innovation, investing in education and R&D, and balancing stability with change. The Economic Brief, DD India. Well, Prasenjit Basu and Anil Padmanabhan continue to be with us. Mr. Basu, let me start with you. The past is a data set, is what they are saying. What we make of it can influence the future. But how important is economic history, would you say, for innovators and for entrepreneurs?
Well, Mokyr is the economic historian, and he focuses on the role of institutions in fostering innovation. The other two, Aghion and Howitt, basically are believers in the idea of creative destruction, particularly having open economies and allowing the flow of new ideas and innovation to play a big role in driving change and positive change. So typically, what happens with creative destruction is that, for instance, if you look at electric vehicles, they're a classic example of creative destruction currently occurring in the global auto industry. So in India, we have the likes of Tata and Mahindra gaining market share through their new EV products in a relatively stable market. So you have a stable market, an innovator enters through, and it causes what is called creative destruction. Some of the older players begin to die out, and the new innovator gains market share and often gains some monopoly profits or duopoly profits from being the first mover.
Yes.
So Tesla, for instance, in the global EV market, was a classic creative destruction force. And now we see that occurring in India with the likes of Tata and Mahindra. So, and similarly, you can look at different sectors. The use of scrap metal in steel production was a form of creative destruction. A new technology emerged that altered the existing structure of the global steel industry. So this is a creative process. There is some destruction in that process, but you also get positive change emerging, and that dynamism that emerges from the ability of new players to come in with innovative ideas imparts a great dynamism to the economy. It's very different from the pre-1991 economy in India, for instance, where very little creative destruction was possible because existing players in every market segment were protected from overseas entry, from imports, as well as from domestic competition. So that was the exact opposite of creative destruction that we had pre-1991.
Sure. Mr. Padmanabhan, Howitt, he says that, growth demands collaboration. That means we need universities and industry and all that to work together for quicker innovation and creative destruction. So is this actually happening? I mean, who takes the lead? What do you think?
See, Mark, this year's award actually flies in the face of what we are seeing transpiring in the United States. Under the leadership of President Trump, it is actually becoming destructive, not creatively destructive, but destructive is the right word. It's regressive economic policies and is exactly the obverse of what these three Nobel laureates were talking about. And the second half of this award was given in the legacy of the person who coined this term creative destruction. It's an economist called Schumpeter. And his marquee book was, I forget the exact title, but it was all about capitalism. So in capitalism, the entire idea is where market forces dominate, and there is a kind of, like in life, there's a cycle of creation, destruction, and creation. But each round creates a more productive and a more creative economy. But what we are seeing in the United States is exactly the opposite. Now, to answer your question as to who takes the lead, it's inevitably the government. Even in the United States, it is a government which took the lead in creating this academic industrial complex. Okay. And subsequently, the private sector got its own legs and it gathered momentum. If you're asking whether the same can be done in India, definitely. And it is already happening. If you look at our top-rung IITs, say IIT Madras or IIT Mumbai or IIT Calcutta, IIT Kanpur, all of them are beginning to create this academic industrial complex. So it's beginning to gather legs in India too, but not at the scale as it is in the United States.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Prasenjit Basu and Anil Padmanabhan. Thank you for joining us and putting that into perspective for us. The book that Schumpeter wrote is Capitalism, Socialism and Democracy. We leave it there. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll move on to our next story. Now, our next report, in fact, is from the tech world. Google has announced an investment of $15 billion in its largest AI and cloud data hub outside of the United States, right here in India. With nearly 1 billion internet users and a rapidly growing digital economy, India is emerging as a global hotspot for artificial intelligence. From big tech giants like Google and Microsoft to AI innovators like OpenAI, the country is quickly becoming the stage for the next wave of AI innovation. Diptanshu Kashyap explains.
India's digital future is now at the center of global race for artificial intelligence. Google has announced a $15 billion investment to build its largest AI and cloud data hub outside the United States in Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh. The facility will start with gigawatt-scale compute capacity. Prime Minister Narendra Modi called it a landmark development, while Google CEO Sundar Pichai said the hub will accelerate AI innovation and strengthen US-India tech cooperation.
It's the largest AI hub that we are going to be investing in anywhere in the world outside of the US. It represents a capital investment over the next 5 years of $15 billion.
The Visakhapatnam hub will be built in collaboration with Adani Group and Airtel, combining renewable energy systems, an expanded fiber optic network, and a major new international sub-sea cable gateway to improve connectivity and resilience on India's eastern coast. Google is also committing about $85 billion globally this year to expand data center capacity as big tech companies race to meet the surging demand for AI services. Officials say the project could create nearly 188,000 jobs, underlining its significance for Andhra Pradesh and the broader economy. India's data center capacity has tripled since 2019, with nearly 1 billion internet users, making the country a rapidly growing global destination for large-scale AI infrastructure and key market for US tech giants.
This digital infrastructure will go a long way in meeting the goals of our India AI mission. First, skilling. We all know that AI is fundamentally changing the way the world moves today. Under such circumstances, there is a serious concern among a lot of IT professionals of what their jobs will be, where they would, how their lives will be impacted. So it's very important for all of us, especially the industry, to reskill and upskill our IT professionals in a major way.
For India, this is more than infrastructure. It is a statement that the country has become central to the ambitions of the world's biggest tech companies, even as rivals OpenAI, Microsoft, and Amazon expand their presence. In September this year, OpenAI announced plans for local data center and its first India office in New Delhi, highlighting the intensifying race for AI innovation with rapidly growing AI compute and semiconductor infrastructure, indigenous AI models, high-performance GPU access, and a focus on clean energy and sustainable growth. India is not just participating in the AI revolution, it is shaping it, positioning itself as a global AI powerhouse. Diptanshu Kashyap's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.
Well, as Brazil prepares to host COP30, it faces a climate paradox, expanding oil exploration even while pledging a green future. President Lula da Silva, he calls it realism, not a contradiction, using oil profits to fund renewables. But critics warn that the world can't burn its way to sustainability. We leave you with Tarun Badgaya's report. Thank you very much for watching the Economic Brief. Namaskar.
Brazil is the 8th largest oil producer, with Petrobras marking up 10% of GDP. President Lula aims to turn it into a top energy firm, using oil revenues to fund a green transition. Though long-term gains are uncertain, indigenous groups say COP30 in Belém highlights their needs.
For us, indigenous people, it is very important that COP30 takes place in Belém because we need to be protagonists of COP30.
President Lula said Brazil must demarcate indigenous lands to uphold rights and reach zero Amazon deforestation by 2030. Meanwhile, Petrobras is expanding offshore drilling in the Foz do Amazonas, expected to draw billions. Economists see short-term gains, but long-term prospects are uncertain as the IEA says global oil demand may peak before 2030.
Deforestation in the Amazon is stabilized, but obviously, our commitment is zero deforestation by 2030 in Brazil.
Despite rising oil profits, Brazil's fiscal system favors just 3 states, receiving 87% of royalties. Critics say the wealth hasn't delivered broad social or green benefits. Brazil exports more than half its oil output, boosting trade surpluses but also exposing its economy to price volatility and global energy transitions. While exports shield domestic emissions, they tie Brazil's fiscal health to markets increasingly shifting towards renewables. Analysts call it a carbon-dependent growth paradox.
Our leaders know we are a very vulnerable region. So we have to do something, both contributing to mitigation and also working on adaptation, because many countries are already suffering.
Analysts warn Brazil may be racing against time by using oil revenue for clean energy. One offshore block could emit approximately 2.5 billion tons of CO2, equal to annual national emissions. Ahead of COP30, Brazil is left with a difficult choice: diversify now or fund a green future with carbon today. Tarun Barghaia's report for the Economic Brief, DD India.